before I do that, I want to welcome the two Fischers for today's seminar. So Martin, to start off, thank you very much to join the LIBRE Hub seminar on a very important topic, which is reporting on a work group that we have on technology development in microscopy and how to share these outputs. And so this would be something very interesting for people to hear about, how to get engaged in this community, which spaces to watch, and maybe what new suggestions to follow to effectively share the designs with the community.
All right, so thank you very much for the introduction. And while I'm trying to get my screen shared, and just a quick feedback, are you all seeing my slides?
Yes, perfect.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, so again, thanks a lot for the introduction. It was it's great to talk about this topic here with you all. So I'm Martin Fischer. I'm a research professor in chemistry and physics at Duke. So I am a co-chair of the Builders Work Group in my spare time. So as a main occupation, I'm a PI and a co-director. So just to give you a quick overview, very briefly about BINA. I'm sure you've heard about BINA. It's BioImaging North America. It's the North American pendant to Latin America bioimaging. It's mostly centered on Canada, US, and Mexico, but of course, we welcome participation from all over the world. And we try to coordinate as much as we can with the other communities that you're all familiar with. So BINA is a community. It's a foundation, it's a nonprofit organization, and we focus on things like advocacy for microscope careers. We develop workshops, tutorials, things like that. We try to help with standardization, but of course we have no regulatory power. But so therefore we get most weight. Our opinion carries the most weight the more members we have. So go ahead, please, if you don't mind, join BINA. It is free. There's no strings attached. I put the QR code in there. We're not that difficult to find. Just Google BioImaging North America, and you'll be getting to us. So we are sort of organized into working groups. For example, training education, early career working group, corporate partners working group, and all those groups are, of course, talking with each other. And today I will highlight the newest group, of which I'm one of the co-chairs, the Builders Working Group. And again, we are a volunteer bunch, so we all do this in our spare time. So why do we even, so who are we? We're relatively newly established. We just basically started operation essentially last year. Abhishek Kumar so he was at MBI, now he's in Madison, and myself are co-chairs. Brian Millis is the board liaison, and what connects us all here, the members, is a passion for tinkering, for building things. And of course, you will recognize one of your very own, Professor Tobias Wenzel. So why do we even build a workers group? Why do this? So let me motivate this a little bit. Let's say you need a microscope. Why don't you just go out and buy one? There's lots of commercial systems. They're super stable, reliable. I wouldn't call them foolproof, but they're much easier to use than if you have to build something. They're available, meaning that you can much easier buy one than you can build one. If you're lucky enough to have enough money, you can buy a service contract, and if something breaks, they'll come and fix it. Or at least you can get tech support if you pay for it, of course. Now, I just put a picture of a commercial system up. This is not one I endorse, it's just I happen to have the picture. Of course, there's downsides. These things are designed to do whatever they were designed to do, but not much else. So if you want to do something else with it that it wasn't designed for, usually you run into trouble. They're not very flexible. And of course, most importantly, these things cost sometimes a ton. Like they're expensive. Obviously, they're well engineered, and of course, when you buy it, you pay the engineer's time, the development time. So why not build one? So this is an example of our home build system. Obviously, it doesn't look quite as fancy as this one or nice, but it works. So why would you build one? Well, sometimes you want to do some experiments that you just can't find a commercial offering. Maybe they're not state of the art. So it has been a technique developed, a microscope technique has been developed, but it's not commercial yet. It takes some time for company to produce a off-the-shelf part. Or it's not doing exactly what you need, so you have no choice. You have to build it yourself. Or of course, you lack the dollar. So whatever currency you're at, you don't have the money to buy one. These things can be really expensive, or maybe they are overkill. So for what you need, you don't want to spend the money because most of those features you might not use. Or sometimes you just want to build one for training purposes. You want to educate somebody how to build a microscope, therefore you don't want to buy one. If you build it yourself, they're extremely flexible. You can modify anything you like. Most of the time, if you custom design it, you can get better performance than if you buy one off the shelf that does many things, but not as good as each individual one. And of course, they can be a lot cheaper, not only to build, but also to maintain. Just to give you an example, a microscope core facility on campus we had a water leak and water dripped on the microscope. And the company came in and said, "Oh, well, we can't fix it. You have to buy a new one." If it had been a custom microscope, we would have replaced the parts that were wet or damaged, and we would be off and running. The company said, "We don't do that. You have to buy a new one." So that's very expensive. Obviously, building one is going to take a lot of time and expertise, not just to build it, but also to operate it and then to fix it, to maintain it. And what's just as bad is if you go through the pain of building one, most often the group that builds it, the PI or the PI's group, they use it, they move on, and this design that might be applicable to lots of other groups, it just sits there and gathers dust or does not get used otherwise or get disseminated. So let's say you decide to build a gizmo, might that be a microscope or some tool or some holder. You can usually you start with, you develop the stuff yourself anyway, and you want to build a new version. You have an idea and you just want to develop something. Great. Or you see other people's work, either in a publication or maybe you see it in a talk and you say, "Oh, wow, this looks great. I want one of those things." All right. So what are the steps? What would you like to have to build one of those? Ideally, you want to know what this device is capable of doing. So you want to have a collection of applications. So what can this device do? Preferably a little demo video. Ideally, you'd like to try this instrument, maybe travel to the site and bring your sample and see whether this actually does what you think it does. Once you decide to build it, you'd love to have an up-to-date parts list, some instructions how to do this, instructions how to use it. Of course, you need to know what you're getting into. What do you need to know to be able to build this? It would be wonderful if you can have a hands-on build workshop. You travel to a site where there is already such a microscope and they sort of do a show and tell to take it apart and have you assemble it. Things always go wrong. You would like to have a way to actually get advice if you run into trouble. So you would like to contact somebody who actually has done this before. And once you are done and you have built this microscope or tool or instrument, you would like to give back to the community. have a place where you can actually advertise how you use this. Maybe even if you made some improvements, you'd like to post this somewhere so other people can benefit from this. And if you update it, maybe a part it's obsolete, and you wanna publish your replacement part. So all these things would be nice to have. Well, a guy can dream, right? What do you actually get in practice? Most time you get a method section of a paper. They're very short. They're just the basics, the most necessary information. You get this one application, the paper, and if you're lucky, you call up the PI, you send an email. The PI sends you maybe a drawing or a piece of software that might or might not work, and then you're on your own. Then off you go. So that's tough. That's really rough, right? So these are basically a recap. These are the pitfalls if you want to build or adopt other people's builds. You get partial design files only. Often those parts list that should be part are incomplete or outdated. Things are obsolete, so you have to replace it. Often you don't know what you need to build this. I've had the case where somebody in the medical school called me up and said, we have all these parts, we bought this, or a student bought this to build this microscope, but we have no idea what to do now. Can you build it for us? Well, sorry, that's a no-go. Often things get built and then they actually don't do what you needed to do. It's just you have the wrong expectation. You don't know exactly what the device is capable of. So you build it and it still doesn't do what you want it to do. So these are the things to avoid. And don't get me wrong, I'm not bashing on the builder. It's not like the PI is not giving out information. Often the PI group that builds it just doesn't have the information that you need, right? Because obviously we all know you have limited resources, time, money, people to work on. Often as a PI, and I know this, I'm a PI myself, we need to get this stuff done. We take shortcuts, we take parts from the shelf, we hack things together so it works. And once it does finally work, let's quickly get the data and publish this and then submit it for another grant. We all know how this works. So once you do a new experiment, of course, sometimes you even disassemble the part that actually works to make sure you have enough resources for the next one. Often the dissemination is an afterthought. So after the experiment's all done, you say, oh, wow, maybe we can actually put the design out there. Sometimes you even forced by the funder. The funder requires you to disseminate this. But it takes much more than just a thought and an idea of, yeah, sure, let's put it out there. It's really hard to assemble all this information correctly. Right? It takes a lot of time to assemble the required information for other people to reproduce your data. It's not just the parts, it's also software. To write software that runs is one thing. To document that software for somebody else to understand what you did is quite another thing. It takes time and it takes commitment, not just after the fact, because who goes back to the old code and then puts some comments in there? That's usually not enough. You have to do this while you develop this stuff. So we all know it's hard enough to fund development itself. It's much harder to fund dissemination. Funders love if you put a section in there, oh, after we're done, we will publish this for everybody to take the design and run with it. But of course, if it comes to putting in money for a person, for a staff to actually do this effort, they all say, well, that's too expensive. So often PIs don't even know where to start to document all this stuff and to disseminate things. That's kind of where this Builders Working Group comes in. We are trying to help. So this is actually directly copied from the mission statement of the Builders Working Group. So I'm going to go through some of those things. I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about events, what kind of events we're planning to organize. I'm going to talk to you about the build repository, which is actually existing. The newly established online forum, discussion forum that is associated with the Builders Group, and our efforts to come up with a best practices document to sort of standardize these procedures a little bit. And I forgot to ask if there's any questions on the way, feel free to interrupt. This is sort of a side note. We do have a resource collection on the BINA Working Group, Builders Working Group website. That is slowly building up. We try to sort of collect some links and repositories to things that are useful for a builder, like what repositories out there specifically to microscopy, but also general purpose. What kind of tools, what kind of microscopes, home-built microscopes are out there, and provide you with the links. And all these kind of goodies, we are slowly assembling this. It is a community resource. So if you have any entries, if you have any changes, please contact us. There is a little web form that gets this information to us. But now going back to the events, we are starting these events soon. We will be offering some kind of virtual seminars about every 2 months. So we interleave working group internal meetings with open seminars. So we would like to introduce to the community topics of interest to the builders community and the adopters community. These are the 3 topics that we have concrete plans for. So one is, what kind of software package are people using for microscope control? And more broadly, what kind of development environment do people use for generalized instrument control? So think of LabVIEW, LabWindows, MATLAB, all these kind of development environments. What do people use? What do people recommend? Data acquisition hardware. We all know there's one vendor that it basically dominates, but are there others? What kind of hardware, data acquisition hardware, are you using in your microscopes? So these seminars are not just a PR for the respective company. We would like to get a real feel for what is out there, what are the pros and what are the cons, what are the limitations, real case examples, real world examples of these, and a real discussion of what are the pros and cons of these various options. We also ultimately would like to have seminars where builders can actually showcase their builds, how it works and what it can do. Of course, we do want to limit ourselves to microscopes that are actually built and that people can also build. So think of open source, open hardware. That's, of course, our preferred route. We are going to have community discussions. We had one last year where people just discuss what is the important topics for builders, what technologies are emerging, where should we focus our efforts. This working group is really a work in progress. It's being shaped as we speak. We also are going to develop some tutorials and hands-on workshops, both virtual and in person. In person mostly, in conjunction with meetings that are already going on. All right, so I mentioned this builders repository. That actually exists now. It's Microscopy DB, and so the working group does not take credit to create this. This has actually been developed by mostly by BINA and ELMI, so the European Light Microscopy Initiative, I think that stands for. Here's the web link. It's a wonderful repository. It's growing. It's small now, but it hopefully will be growing. So it is a repository. It's not so nothing's hosted on there. It's just links to other places. So it's an index. It's not just microscopes and tools, this section here. There's also job announcement, events, and other general resources. So tutorials, training resources. How to get there, how to search the site is a little bit tricky. So you basically the browse sites. it actually gets you to all the partner organizations that then provide access to the database. So for example, through BINA, you click on the tools section here, and that then gets you to a searchable and arrangeable database interface where you can sort things, search by things. And as you see here, it's really just a brief outline what that actually is, and it lists the URL, right? So it just points you to where you can find the information. There's hardware in there, software in there. There's not just microscopes, but tools, anything that's useful for microscopy, little sample holders, tools. And by the way, you'll see this light shutter little project that actually you will see later on with the talk by Matthias. So if you have something that you'd like to contribute, that's super easy. Just click on the Add to Database tool, or there is a little further down, there's an Add Tool button, and it gets you to just a little form, which you fill out. Tool name, URL, where is this actually located? Is mostly it maybe GitLab or GitHub or your own personal website. A short description and some information on licensing and price and things like that. It does go through a vetting procedure, so we make sure that it's not junk, it's not some spam, and then it gets published into this database. So somewhat related to this is this Builders Group online forum. So this online forum is basically a place to discuss builders-related topics. And we decided we would approach Jennifer Waters to make this part of Microforum. And I'm sure you guys have heard Microforum. It's a wonderful forum, anything you would ever like to know about microscopy. So these posts can be follow-up from these working group seminars. Maybe it's just a way to continue the discussion of these topics. It could be related to these entries in the database, in the microscopy DB database. And I'll show you an example of this. It's a nice place to provide additional information for people to actually post a question and then hopefully get an answer. And of course, when people build it, they can post their build experiences, maybe updates, things like that. And generally for the microscopy community, for any other build related questions. So here's the site. You can easily get through it from MicroList. So Microforum, actually. So the easiest way to get to this is if you Google Microforum, you'll get to this place. It's a part of the categories. You're going to have to scroll all the way down. The last entry here is builders and tools. So if you do that, you'll get to this section. Right now, there's only one general topic in here and one example, which is, again, this shutter control entry, where you can actually post your question or get some updated information about this project. Okay, this is just a little, well, more like a request for help, but this is the planning phase. We'd like to establish a document or some kind of guideline. What do you do if you have developed a microscope or you are developing a tool for microscopy, and how do you actually get this out to the community? There are lots of pain points for developers. How to assemble this, what kind of resources do you need? Where do you post things? How do you advertise this? How do you go about doing this? What are the IP restrictions or licensing issues? So we are trying to assemble this in a standards and best practices document. We're actually going to do this while basically following somebody who develops a microscope and then advising that person through community efforts to write this down and then post this. So we have two sort of levels of engagement in the working group. One is just basically participating in the seminars, contribute to this database, and suggest resources to include. That's probably most people. Very dedicated people, very dedicated builders and adopters, can become working group members. We participate in membership meetings. We actually shape the direction of this group. I told you this is a very new group. We're still trying to figure out where we are. Organizing the seminars and tutorials and maintain all these resources, sort of help behind the scenes, moderate in these forums once they get up and running, and of course help with this best practices documents. So if you're interested in helping, no matter where you are, again, we're focused on Canada, US, and Mexico, but we are open to all memberships, especially, of course, Latin America as well. So we welcome your participation. Here's our contact. This goes to Nikki, and she will forward it to the right people. So that was it. I'd like to acknowledge all the people, many people who helped. Of course, primarily all the working group members. So again, Abhishek Kumar, myself as co-chairs, Brian and the executive board. Kevin is actually a founder, one of the founders of BINA, co-chairs actually of BINA. And of course, we have program coordinators, Nikki and Vanessa. They really do all the hard work. Allison, who was a founder, she actually initiated this whole Builders Working Group. So big thanks to her. Elmi was involved in a lot of the database development. John Zuckerberg Initiative funds a good part of BINA and also funds me as a microscope imaging scientist. So thanks to all of you guys, and of course, thank you all for listening, and I'd be happy to answer some questions.